What about, say you've had a judgment against you. How do you appeal? What appeals do you have available to you, and how do you go about that?
Well, good question, Ben, because there are so many different avenues to settle with the IRS. It's very, very encouraging. It just depends on the temperature of the client and how long he wants to go. And then there's the consideration: do you pay the IRS or do you play? Mm-hmm. Do you go on to all these different levels? And the accountants that do this, frankly, try to advise their clients. Sometimes the clients want to keep going on to all these different levels, when really it makes more sense financially just to settle. If it's $1,000, whatever the threshold of pain is, you're either going to be paying the accountant or you're going to be paying the IRS. And so oftentimes, even when the client believes they're right, they'll go ahead and settle because they want to get on with their business, making money. You don't have any ability to go back to the IRS and say, well, I had to pay my accountant $3,000 and there was a no change. You can't get that money back.
Yeah.
But your actual question was, where all can you go? And the very first level, and some accountants, the way that they work, or if they're the tax preparer and they're not representing the client without the client there, they'll go to the manager level and have a manager conference. And at that point is where you can bring up things that maybe went wrong during the audit from your perspective. But that particular level is still, the IRS environment, the home field advantage, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And that's, the auditor is someone who works for this manager, so they tend to side with them. But you've got a great deal of power, so to speak, when you have well documented and all the code sections, which you can ask that they substantiate the code sections of the things that they want to disallow. But you don't want to create a hostile environment. You're trying to settle.
Sure.
Because if that doesn't work, then you can go on to appeals. And after the appellate level, you can go on beyond that. And there are several different avenues all the way to tax court, which only a few accountants, 270 I think we counted, are able to practice before tax court if you're not an attorney. They tend to be very, very good at it, and some of them have written books about it and written books for practitioners on how to handle it. But that's a very limited group. So the way the accountant is involved, you go all the way to tax court. And the people that do it say that you always improve your chances because now you're in a bit of a neutral environment at that point. Once you moved on to tax court, the accountant is not representing the client in tax court unless they're admitted to practice. Mm-hmm. But they prepare all the documentation and everything that's needed to be filed, and then the attorney or the person that's submitted takes it on to tax court.
And I guess it gets down to, if you feel like you're right and you've got the cash to spend on the appeal, go for it. But a good offer and compromise were probably your best way to go in a lot of these, would you say?
Good point, Ben. Thanks for bringing it up, because the offer and compromise is normally after they've assessed the amount that you owe. And from their perspective, it's closed. And now you have to look at your client and say, is he eligible for an offer and compromise? And an offer and compromise eligibility is based on your ability to pay. And there are companies that only do offers and compromises. And if anybody does a Google search, if they're being audited, they'll find these companies that only do that. And the very experienced accountants call these people OIC mills. They have a legitimate business practice in filing offers and compromise on behalf of clients, but that's what they do. And that's if there's some doubt as to collectability and you're not in bankruptcy, and possibly if the IRS is about to levy assets and you want to get an offer and compromise filed. Or you can file for an audit reconsideration, yet another avenue that you have.
There's a couple of other topics I want to make sure we get to before our time runs out here. Let's talk about the Taxpayer Bill of Rights a little bit. Tell me about that. Tell me about what's happening with that now, and a little bit about some of the rights that the taxpayer has that the CPA and the tax preparer deals with.
Well, the taxpayer has the Taxpayer Bill of Rights 2, which changed things considerably. And as we talked about earlier, Ben, sometimes folks have been dealing with the IRS, say 20 years ago, and then it got really quiet. It was the kinder, gentler IRS. And now because of the tax gap, they're out again trying to solve this tax gap problem, looking for unreported income. So the Taxpayer Bill of Rights is very, very important because it enabled the accountant to represent their clients so that they don't have an automatic right to talk to the accountant. As a matter of fact, they don't have the automatic right to talk to the client. So that's a tremendous ability awarded to taxpayers by the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, so that you don't reveal things similar to the right not to incriminate yourself in a court of law.
Sure.
And this is actually, these IRS audits actually are building up to a case if it needs to get to a case. The mission of appeals is to settle without litigation, and that's their mission, and to assess a fair amount of tax, which is the part of the mission statement of the IRS, to assess a fair amount of tax. So the Bill of Rights also established the National Taxpayer Advocate Office. Yet another avenue, if at any time you haven't heard from the IRS in 30 days, or the procedure isn't working the way that you perceive that it should be working, a client or the practitioner can contact the National Taxpayer Advocate offices. And there's one in every state, and there's one in every IRS office. Nina Olson is the commissioner. And it's a terrific avenue for resolution. And there are other ones. If you have a minute, I can talk about.
Sure.